So Peter is there, and the trigger for him, or what begins to happen, is that men come from James. So there's a wide debate. Did they come from James, or did they come from Jerusalem? And some people would say, well, they couldn't have come from James because it's false. It's not true. What they're saying is not true, that you need to be circumcised to be saved, that you need to pull away from the Gentiles, you can't eat with them. He said, all this. That's not true doctrine, right? So some people say, there's no way that they were from James. They were from James' church. Whereas other people say, well, the Greek here is very emphatic. These people came from James, the Lord's brother, the apostle, James, half-brother. So I'm going to leave it for you to decide. That doesn't really necessarily matter in the end, but I will say this. If you flip back real quick to Acts 21, this is one of the great things about the book of Acts. You can see, it's almost like the behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on in the church. In Acts chapter 21, this is the rub. This is the rub that Paul is up against. So this is Luke writing in Acts 21. It's Luke writing about his journey with Paul. That's why he's saying we. He says, when we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. So it's James and all the elders. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law." So let's stop there for a second. So Paul goes to Jerusalem. This is years later. Paul goes to Jerusalem, and he says, and this is after the Jerusalem Council. This is after Acts 15. This is after they established that Gentiles don't have to follow the law. This is after they established that Gentiles can be saved, all of that, right? So they show up in Jerusalem. They meet James and the elders. And they say to them, James and the elders say to them, "You see, brother, thousands of Jews have gotten saved, and they're all zealous for the law." Well, this is exactly what we're talking about, right? They're people that have trusted in Christ, but they still have a zeal for the law. A burning, the word there is a burning, the idea of a burning, it's actually where the Mormons get their idea. It's actually a burning in the chest is the idea. So they have a zeal, a burn, a fire for the law. He goes on there, and he says, verse 21, "They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to customs. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come. So do what we tell you. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow." It's a Nazirite vow, most likely. It doesn't say it in the passage, but it's most likely a Nazirite vow based on their haircuts. He says, "Take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved." That's all it has to do with a Nazirite vow. "Then everyone will know there is no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law." James and the elders. Paul shows up. James says, "We got a problem. There are thousands of Jews that have been saved here in Jerusalem. They're all very zealous for the law. So and they've heard a rumor that you're telling Jews that get saved that they don't have to follow the law anymore, and that they don't have to circumcise their children anymore." What's the major issue of Galatians? Circumcising your children. What's Paul's stance on that? You don't do that anymore. You don't have to do that anymore. It's not something you have to do. You don't have to follow the law for righteousness. So James says, because we have these believers and because they've heard that you're teaching this, here's what we need you to do. We need you to pony up for these 4 guys' haircuts, to have their hair shaved for a Nazirite vow, which is directly out of Levitical law. We need you to go and pay for them, go into the temple, do the cleansing rites at the temple just like they do, pay for their haircuts, and then everyone will know that you don't actually teach that you have to follow the law anymore. Isn't that wild? Am I saying that James is a heretic? Am I saying that James is not an apostle? No. I would just put forward that even the apostles had things to learn. You can decide whether or not these men came from James. It seems pretty clear they did. Now, that's scary for us, and I understand why it's scary for us. But the reality is, Peter gets a big talking to here. James has to learn some things. Thomas has to learn some things. So I'm not trying to say anything weird. Please don't go somewhere weird with this and this. Oh, you're saying that the apostles didn't get along? No, I'm saying they had things to learn. And I'm saying that the church, by the grace of God, overcame incredible difficulties by his grace. But so the other, I think, big piece of evidence to this is that when these guys show up, if they were of no report, why would Peter listen to them? Why? It tells us why exactly he did what they said to do, because he was afraid. It was fear that caused him to retract. What was he afraid of? The men that came from James. People of the circumcision party. That term, circumcision party or group, it happens multiple times in Acts. They were Christians that were zealous for the law. They were wrong. They got saved, and then they had bad doctrine. That's what happened. And that bad doctrine began to extend to all these different churches in the Gentile world. And then it became a division. That's what happened. So we don't have to run away and say, oh no, our faith isn't rocked in the least. Our faith is strengthened because God is so powerful, he was able to work through that. James, in the end, history tells us, or tradition, he was thrown off the top of the temple. It's like a 900-foot drop at the location he was thrown off at. And he was thrown off because he was a follower of Jesus and believed in the grace of God. And it was as my understanding, religious Jews that chucked him off there. So we don't know what happens after this point. There's no follow-up. It would have been nice, right? Like a second Galatians, like, hey, so glad Peter. We don't have that. But what we do know is there's this wild contention, and it occurs because of pressure from people that had bad doctrine. And the doctrine was, you have to do works to stay saved. You have to do works to be right with God. And that's why it's so important that we look at these things and consider these things, and we're guarded. That's why doctrine is, we're guarded. Because if we begin to say, oh, it takes believing in Jesus and being baptized, or the King James Bible, or having a devotional life, or obedience to Christ at all times, as soon as we fill in things that it takes to be saved, we have now created a standard that is impossible to fill, and we cannot do it. And we make God a debtor, because we say, I got baptized, really baptized, full immersion, no sprinkling for me, I deserve, you owe me salvation now. I read the King James, you owe me salvation now. I have a regular devotional life, unlike all these other Christians that are so milquetoast. I deserve salvation now. This is so important. So Paul says, he says, look, it was worth it. I withstood him to the face, and I did it in the general assembly. The second part, because we'll talk more of the doctrine next week. Fear. Think about this. The same dude who pulls a sword out and is going to fight a cohort of Roman soldiers with a centurion. The same guy who got in the boat again and again after like it being swamped by waves, or having to catch fish after fishing all night and getting nothing. And think of all the times that he endured. All the times that he has the dialogue with Jesus and about his love for Christ. Endured that. That's one of the most brutal dialogues. When Jesus is on the beach with Peter, and he says, Peter, do you love me? There's something that doesn't come through in the English. It's actually really important. Because Jesus asked Peter, he says, do you love me? Do you agape me? Do you have a moral supreme love for me? And when Peter responds, he says, Lord, I phileo you. Like when we get our city, Philadelphia, what he says to Jesus, I love you, I'm fond of you like a brother, is what he's saying. So Jesus says, do you have an absolute moral love for me above everything? And Peter can't reciprocate it. He's actually honest. And he says, I'm fond of you. And so Jesus says, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter says, Lord, you know. I phileo you. I'm fond of you like a brother. And then the third time, when he's grieved, Jesus says, do you phileo me? In other words, he's challenging now. He says, Peter, are you even fond of me? Do you have that in your heart? And that's why it says Peter was grieved, because it wasn't just because, 3 times I'm getting a little worn out here. The idea is Jesus pointing out this radical flaw in his life where he's saying, do you have a fondness for me? And that's why his response is, Lord, you know everything. You know everything. You know I'm fond of you. What a humbling. What an incredible, difficult thing to go through with the Lord. And he prevails. And then you see this where Jesus says, hey, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. This reestablishment as an apostle, this encouragement that you're still with me, that I'm still with you. And it's just incredible. This is who Peter is. But over and over again, what's the one thing, in all his struggles, where that just gets him? Well, I shouldn't say all, because I don't know that. In a lot of struggles that we read about in the New Testament, fear. Fear is a crazy thing, because it can come from all sorts of things. We can have fear of missing out, right? A lot of times that can be a big high school or junior high temptation and on into our adulthood. That we fear that we're going to miss out with our friends, that our friends are going to call us. And that's really the fear that leads to depression through social media, right? That's why social media can be, I'm not saying it has to be, so destructive, because we look at everybody else's life and then we begin to experience fear because, well, my life isn't like that. I'm not jet skiing in Maui. My family's not perfect. I don't take pictures of my devotion with the perfect cappuccino somehow and my Bible's open. I don't have that life. I'm missing out. They're not missing out, but I'm missing out, right? And it generates a fear and anxiety. I need to have that. And then when we don't realize that, the more we imbibe of the social media, then we get depressed. We're convinced that we're missing out. We can have financial fear. What's going to happen to the dollar? Is Russia and South America and China, are they going to bind together and sink the dollar? Is the yen going to take over? What's going to happen? Are we going to have to go to the euro? We can have medical fear. Am I going to die? Am I going to be crippled? Am I going to, what's going to happen with my body? We can have all sorts of fears, can't we? The interesting thing about fear is that by definition, fear is considering something that may happen in the future and then responding to it in that fearful and in that anxious way. I could get sick. I could lose my money. I could lose my house. I could. And so we fear that. And fear, and then in this case, it's social fear. Maybe tied in with a religious fear, but we don't have time to go over it. But I encourage you, if you like language, the words that Paul is using here, when he calls them hypocrites, it means to speak under. And it literally means to speak under. It's the same word that would be used in society for actors. So, for example, if it were like a Friday night in the Roman colonies, you might say, if you had a denarii laying around or whatever, you could say, hey, do you want to go see the hypocrites? And you were just saying, let's go see the actors. Let's go see the people that wear masks. So the idea that Paul, when he says the word there for hypocrisy is speaking from under a mask. So he's declaring that these people, they don't actually believe what they're doing. Peter doesn't actually believe what they're doing. Remember, it's Peter that goes to Cornelius' house. It's Peter that goes into a trance on the top of his roof, and God lowers down a sheet 3 times and says, kill and eat. And the interesting thing is, what does Peter say to God when God says, kill and eat? He says, not so, Lord, because nothing unclean has ever entered into my mouth. But way back in John, it tells us that Jesus declared all foods clean. But now, decades later, Peter's on his house going, I do not eat things that aren't kosher. I stick to the dietary law. And God tells him, stop declaring unclean, ceremonially, unclean, what I have declared to be clean. And it's true for the food, and it's true for the Gentile.